Let's dive right into this explainer. Picture this. It's the morning of April 14th, 1943. A German engineer named Vanner is standing at the Kummersdorf proving ground, just about 20 miles south of Berlin. And he's staring at an intact American Sherman tank. They called it War Daddy 2, and it had been captured after the disastrous American defeat down at Kasserine Pass. Now, as Vanner actually climbed inside this cold steel machine, he was deeply unsettled, because what he was looking at would quietly but completely unravel everything the German armored corps believed about themselves and the enemy they were fighting.
So when Vanner and his team finally finished their evaluation, their primary critique boiled down to this one specific observation. American manufacturing employs loose tolerances. Now, to the Germans, who had basically inherited generations of absolute precision engineering, this was meant to be a severe insult. They looked at the Sherman and just saw sloppiness, unpolished surfaces, gaps where German parts would be fitted perfectly tight. But what they totally missed was that this unpolished approach, it was actually the secret to the Sherman's hidden brilliance.
Which really makes you wonder, right? How exactly does a perceived flaw, this supposed sloppiness, end up spelling doom for the entire German armored corps? How does it completely dismantle their myth of armored superiority? Well, the answer reveals this massive blind spot in the German war machine, and honestly, it fundamentally changes how we look at armored warfare during the Second World War.
To really get it, we have to look at the physical endurance of War Daddy 2 before it even reached those engineers. After a green American crew abandoned the perfectly undamaged tank at Kasserine Pass, a German crew painted "Do Not Disassemble" on its side and drove it 350 kilometers to the port of Sfax. That is a 4.5-day journey across terrible, unpaved Tunisian roads. And here's the crazy part. Not a single thing broke. A tank built by guys working in Ohio locomotive factories flawlessly pulled off a drive that would have severely stressed German armor.
You see, this exposes a massive clash in philosophies. A German tank, like their famous Panther, was essentially a bespoke, handcrafted object. If a part didn't fit perfectly, a master machinist literally had to hand file and adjust it. Every single component was uniquely fitted. But the American system was the exact opposite. Those Kummersdorf engineers took a road wheel assembly from one captured Sherman built in Ohio, and they swapped it with a part from another Sherman built 600 kilometers away in Pennsylvania. And guess what? It fit perfectly. No master machinists required.
The Germans were frankly stunned by what they just considered ordinary miracles. I mean, aside from those interchangeable road wheels, they found this little auxiliary power unit mounted right behind the driver. This tiny home light generator ran the tank's electrical system and the turret traverse without ever needing to start the main engine. And even better, it provided heat. So in the dead of a freezing winter, American crews could stay warm and rotate their turrets silently, while German crews were freezing in silent tanks or had to loudly burn their precious fuel just to look around. Okay, fast forward a bit to June 1943 at the Hillersleben Proving Ground. German propaganda desperately needed a win, so they set up this demonstration. They tested War Daddy 2 right alongside their brand new heavy tank, the Panther. Both tried to climb this steep, completely muddy slope. The Sherman just churned and slid backward, failing the climb. But the 700-horsepower Panther effortlessly crested the hill. Factory directors were cheering, propaganda magazines went wild over their new heavily armored Colossus, and it just fed right back into their absolute obsession with technical dominance.
But that illusion? Yeah, it shattered just a few weeks later. At the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, 200 of those beautiful, powerful Panthers rolled forward. Within 24 hours, more than half were completely out of action. And it wasn't from Soviet guns, it was from mechanical failure. Their incredibly complex final drives just shattered under the tank's massive weight. By the end of the first week, operational readiness in some of these Panther units plummeted to an abysmal 16%. Literally 5 out of 6 Panthers were just sitting there broken, waiting for bespoke, hand-filed parts that were simply never going to come. Because here is the reality that flips the script on tank combat. It was almost never about who had the thickest armor. The side that got the first round on target won the fight. Period. The Sherman had this independent hydraulic traverse that could spin the turret a full 360 degrees in just 15 seconds. The Panther? Its traverse was driven by the main engine idling, so a full rotation took an agonizing 60 seconds. In a battle where seconds literally meant lives, the Sherman completely dominated reaction time. And adding to that lightning-fast reaction time was the Westinghouse gyroscopic stabilizer. Now, it didn't auto-aim like a modern video game, but it kept the barrel steady while the tank bounced over uneven ground. So the very moment a Sherman stopped moving, its gun was already right near level.
The American gunner only needed a tiny correction to put steel on target in a matter of seconds, while the German gunner was still physically wrestling a wildly bouncing 75mm barrel into position. By June of 1944, this whole American philosophy of absolute standardization crossed the English Channel for D-Day. The U.S. didn't just land tanks under heavy fire, they landed a literal logistics miracle. Right behind the assault forces were vessels carrying over 50,000 universally standardized spare parts. Every single track link, engine block, and gyroscope perfectly matched parts from any of the 11 different factories building them back in the States. They even brought floating repair depots directly onto the beaches. And this powered the ruthless efficiency of the American 5-tier echelon repair system. It scaled from tank crews handling minor fixes right there in the mud, all the way up to huge rear area factories doing total rebuilds. Because of those interchangeable parts the Germans loved to mock, an American field mechanic could take an intact turret from a completely destroyed Sherman and just bolt it directly onto another Sherman's intact hull. From 2 totally dead tanks, they'd have 1 fighting vehicle back in the war in 48 hours. German mechanics, lacking those interchangeable parts, couldn't even dream of doing that. By August 1944, so just 2 months after D-Day, the culmination of these two philosophies was totally stark. American armored units were running at a staggering 85% operational readiness. Even though they were taking ferocious losses in the hedgerows, the system just kept replacing and repairing them constantly. Meanwhile, German panzer divisions had dropped down to 50% and were falling incredibly fast. Simply put, a burned-out Sherman was repaired by Friday. A burned-out Panther was just scrap metal. These two worlds completely collided in January 1945 in a frozen French village called Herlisheim. An elite German SS unit, led by a guy named Erwin Bachmann, was down to only 4 functional Panthers from major assault. In a crazy, chaotic, close-quarters fight, they actually managed to ambush an American unit and captured 12 intact Shermans. But with American artillery about to rain down on them, these veteran German Panther crews had to immediately climb into the captured American tanks and drive them into combat just to survive. So suddenly, you have these veteran German tankers who are very used to the heavy, highly demanding Panther, feeling the absolute truth of American engineering with their own hands. The Sherman's synchromesh transmission shifted effortlessly, right? The electric turret swung incredibly fast. The tall compartment literally let the loader stand fully upright, and the wide-angle periscopes offered amazing visibility. And that Ford V8, it started instantly in the freezing cold. It was, at its core, a machine that simply forgave the user. Just 6 days after Bachmann's men captured those Shermans, the German Panzer Commission held a major meeting, and General Wolfgang Tomele delivered this quietly devastating quote to the guys responsible for production. He said, "In such circumstances, an orderly utilization of tanks is simply impossible. The troops lose their confidence and abandon the whole vehicle." He wasn't talking about troops running away from the enemy. He meant German crews were literally abandoning their own tanks because they no longer trusted that the machines would move when their lives were on the line. That is wild. And the raw numbers backing up that panic? Just staggering. Nearly 1,000 elite German tanks were sitting completely useless in fields, not because they got hit by enemy fire, but because their own overly stressed gearboxes had literally chewed themselves apart. We're talking 500 defective final drives on the Panzer IV, 370 on the Panther, and roughly 100 on the Tiger. When a final drive shattered, the tank just stopped dead in its tracks, trapping the crew inside while artillery dialed in on them. The root cause of all this was a shockingly low threshold, 150 kilometers. Post-war analysis showed that the final drive of a Panther had an average fatigue life of just 150 kilometers under combat stress. The engineering stress on its 75-tooth gear was absolutely massive, and Germany just lacked the raw materials to make stronger steel. So an American Sherman could easily cross most of France on a single set, while a heavy Panther could barely make it from one French village to the next before totally destroying itself. Now, contrast that incredibly fragile design with the American approach. Over 49,000 Shermans were produced by 11 different factories. The Americans mastered mass manufacturing by using these robust, margin-heavy herringbone gears in their final drives. They distributed the load so evenly that you can literally pull a final drive from a Sherman that's been rotting in a field for 40 years, open it up, and find the gears perfectly intact with absolutely zero corrosion. Built to last. Honestly, the ultimate testament to this American design, whenever German units captured Shermans, they never modified them. See, when they captured Soviet T-34s, the Germans heavily modified them, adding their own cupolas, their own radios. But when Erwin Bachmann's unit grabbed those 12 Shermans at Herlisheim,
They simply painted German crosses right over the white stars and drove them straight into battle. They changed absolutely nothing because, well, there was absolutely nothing to fix. As the source material beautifully puts it, the Americans didn't build the best tank of the Second World War. They built the best system. True superiority was never about having the thickest armor or the biggest gun on a handful of exquisite prototypes. It was about creating a highly reliable, easily repairable system built by everyday locomotive workers and car mechanics thousands of miles away that worked perfectly every single time you needed it to.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question to ponder. What actually matters more when everything is on the line? Handcrafted perfection or a standardized system that simply works every single time? Those Kummersdorf engineers initially scoffed at American loose tolerances, but it was exactly that standardized logistics miracle that completely dismantled the entire German war machine. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. If this changed how you look at the engineering of history, keep asking questions, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.